Parikshit went the younger Kali, who was growing with a strong muscular body, and said, "I owe you one." Kali Koko was embarrassed, but the younger Kali patted him on the back. "Big brother, I hope you don't mind that I did your job," he said. Parikshit and Janmeja began walking ahead. The scene ended. Now Kali was in the king's court. These scenes were just marking the important details of his past. He saw Janmeja, now a bit older than he was in the previous scene. He looked scrawny, standing close to the throne. He was yelling at his father. Parikshit, who now looked old and weak, sat on his throne. "You cannot let Kali lead. An Asura shouldn't be allowed to lead the army." "Father, how does it matter? He's a good boy." The old man coughed. Kali had no idea about this conversation. He always thought Janmeja hadn't liked Kali because he had been like a son to Parikshit, and there was this inherent jealousy emanating from him. Kali had thought that Janmeja had just wanted his father's attention, but Janmeja had hated Kali because he had believed him to be a stereotypical Asura. "We are losing to Nagas. We are losing to Nagas because we did not employ Kali's intellect till now. He has a sharp mind and he's a genius. He has studied all the ancient ways of war tactics. That Asura has blinded you," he yelled. "He has used some magic on you and it's making you trust him." Parikshit laughed at the idiosyncratic objection made by Janmeja. "You are weak, child, and you are stubborn. I'm having second doubts about whether I should make you my heir or not." To the Kuru, the scene instantly changed to a room that belonged to Parikshit. A small goblet had been kept beside the bed. Kali watched Janmeja sneaking in. He poured some liquid inside the goblet of wine. No, Kali couldn't believe what he was seeing. He began to shout at Janmeja, "Don't you dare!" The scene changed and showed Kali a painful memory. Parikshit was on his deathbed, and Kali was sitting next to him. "My dear friend, you have been like my own son," the coughing dying king said. "It was a privilege knowing you. It was an honor serving you. Your Highness, you shall be a great man, but you must be careful. There's a thin line between." He coughed again. Kali saw how weak and frail Parikshit looked. His eyes had shrunken and his face had lost all color. "There's a thin line between good and evil. Always make sure to do good, for life is too short to be evil." That moment, the younger Kali had lost the man who had been like a father to him. Parikshit's eyes were closed forever. Kali now felt sick. If only the eye of Brahma had the power to not just show him the past but let him alter it, Kali would not hesitate to murder Janmeja. Kali already knew what the next scene would be. He clearly remembered now. He saw Janmeja with the crown over his head. Younger Kali and Durukti had been tied up as Janmeja ordered their execution. "My father never had the courage to do so, but I would kill them both. They poisoned my father. We know you are working with the Nagas, and I shall burn all of them after I deal with you. You and your sister are evil." Younger Kali and Durukti were taken into a cell where they would be killed quietly, for Kali was getting a lot of support from the people, but the executioner was none other than Koko and his sister Vikoko, who were Janmeja's guards. Now that Parikshit was dead, Koko and Vikoko cut off their restraints and told them that the cell opened up to the sewers which would lead Kali and Durukti out of the kingdom. "Why are you doing this?" asked Kali. "Because he's killing you for being an Asura, my lord, and we are Asuras too." "You are an Asura?" young Kali shrieked. Koko and Vikoko nodded. Young Kali had wondered why they didn't have golden eyes, the usual Asura trademark, but then not every Asura had golden eyes, only the pure ones did. Kali's father had been of pure breed. He had been a nobleman while his mother had been a slave, both of them from the Asura race. Thus Kali and Durukti were purebloods while some of his siblings weren't. "Thank you, my friend." Young Kali patted him on the shoulder. "Let us come with you. Janmeja is a tyrant. We do not wish to work for him anymore," said Vikoko. "Are you sure?" "Without a doubt," Koko said, and the voice trailed off as the scene dissolved. Kali realized now that the warmth, the burning sensation in his hand had stopped, and he woke up. He was sweating profusely as he watched the water where his hand was swallowing a lump in his throat. He sat upright on the boat, wiping his sweat. He was back in the present, and Durukti was watching him intently while Alakshmi was still at the wheel. He looked at Koko and Vikoko, who looked worried. Kali stared at Koko. He looked so old now, with his wrinkly skin, his grey beard covering his face, and his white hair. The past seemed so real to him, as if it had just happened. Kali looked at his hand, which was wet. He wiped it off on his dhoti. Shukra came and sat beside him. "What did you see?" Kali told him. "Yes, the eye of Brahma doesn't just let you see the past from your eyes, but from every perspective you had no idea about." Kali shook his head. "I didn't know he had poisoned his own father. We do some crazy things is for power and the crown." Shukra sniggered. "You have blood on your nose?" Kali hadn't realized that. He wiped it away. "This is horrible." He shook his head. "I just don't understand how you left the kingdom, made peace with the Nagas, led an expedition against Janmeja and killed him." Shukra narrated the rest of the story that Kali had hadn't seen through the eye, but he knew you helped Coco and Vikoko conceal their identities and gave them a new life. Thus they swore a blood oath to protect you. Since in the original Asura culture we protect the Almighty One, Shukra hissed, signaling at Coco and Vikoko. They were now old and battered, but still the same strong individuals that they used to be. Kali recalled how he had defeated Janmeja. It had taken years for him to come in the inner circle of the Nagas before joining their ranks and fighting Janmeja. But by then the Kuru Empire had been dissolved and broken into scattered provinces by Janmeja. He had then assigned these provinces to the kings of his choice, one of them being Vedanta's domain. Janmeja had been in Varungarh when he had been attacked. Kali had come with his ships and cannons and blown Janmeja's gigantic castle that was situated on the sea. As the battle came to shore, he had used the technique of Mandala Vyuha. It was a defensive position, cavalry in the front while the commander-in-chief Kali at the back. Once his men had started killing Janmeja's men, he had raced ahead to fight Janmeja, who had been waiting for him on his chariot. Kali had lurched from his chariot to Janmeja's. They had tried to slice each other apart. Janmeja's chariot had been moving at a breakneck speed. The horses had trudged and collapsed when the chariot had jerked. Janmeja had been flung into the sea. Kali had also fallen. Standing up, he had walked towards Janmeja. As Janmeja had tried to find his sword in the water, Kali had no need for a weapon. Then he had punched and plunged him deep inside the water, drowning him until Janmeja's body stopped resisting. He had won. Varungarh had been his. The Nagas had cheered for their leader. All this was coming back to him, and for a moment Kali felt proud for who he was and what he had achieved, though now he had fallen and had lost everything. You saw the wrong path, though, Shukra quietly added. What do you mean? You saw what you wanted to see, but you must now go back and see what you don't want to see. Why? I have learned my lesson and I am proud of what I did. Kali paused, thinking, I am one of the last Asuras and I conquered half of this country. If that's not damn well impressive, I don't know what is. That's true, but there is still something you don't know about yourself. You are after all just beginning your journey to fight the Adharm, and you are preparing yourself, but first you must know the truth. Kali narrowed his gaze. What truth? Poisoned his own father? Shukra shook his head. It is about the memory you have blocked. Remember the night your siblings died in the fire? Kali nodded. Now go back to that time and see for yourself. Who should I see in particular? Kali asked. Your brother. Kali recalled the image of a baby boy, the only male in his entire lot of siblings. What truth? He died in the fire like the rest. End of story. Kali spat. No, he didn't, whispered Shukra. Kali's blood ran cold. What do you mean? Your brother is alive. He lives in Ilavarti and has grown into a fine strong man, and it is time you know who he is. Kadru was getting bored. She had been waiting in the meadows for a while with her men and Jamun. They had accepted the invitation and were here in Suparnika, the land of Supans. Far off across the sea she saw a large dome-like fortress as huge as the entire Nagpuri that marked the entrance to Suparnbhumi. Around it was a long-winded bridge. Trees lined both the sides of the fortress. Suparnbhumi stood above sea level with long strong pillars that held the entire city. Little caves had been built on the sea where the actual Amrit could be found. The wheels of her mind were turning. How can I steal the Amrit? She glanced at her wound. It had filled with pus. She needed the bloody Amrit to save her life. She felt weaker every day. Jamun had noticed that too, but then the political leader didn't care much about Kadru's well-being. He was glad to be here, standing in the meadow close to Suparnabhumi. People said that Suparnabhumi is a well-nourished, well-supplemented city belonging to one of the brightest and the most technologically advanced Tiavan Bialis. But then there had been a massive war. The breaking had happened. Mahayuddha had caused the Supans to be more cautious and reserve their resources. They had already been extensively using their abundant supplies. I hate them. She didn't like the Supans, selfish creatures that were hoarding the Amrit, but she was going to take it. She had a plan, of course. Go inside, bond with them, well, make her way to the cave, steal the Amrit and escape. Though the stealing part was going to be tricky, she will have to create a diversion, and she had a plan for that as well. She couldn't see partially that bloody Nanda had stabbed her. The recovery had taken time, which is why it had taken them so many days to accept Tarakshi's invitation. The eye had been covered with a patch. She was in a cloak that covered her battle armor, her short skirt made of linen, and a bronze plate on her chest. Jamun was in traditional Naga robes. They take too much time, he rasped under his breath, and perhaps it was a coincidence, but at that moment Kadru saw something in the air. She looked up and saw 3 winged chariots appear. They were flying, shooting blue remnants of the Amrit from the back. Finally they landed in the meadows, and from one of Maruda chewing something in his mouth. Well, looky. He grinned. What took you so long? Kadru asked, trying hard not to cuss. across at him. Chill down, Snake, Maruda chuckled. On board now? Kadru nodded. She didn't expect she would get to sit in one of these thingies, though this way she might be able to observe the mechanics of the chariot. We aren't using the main gate? Kadru asked as she sat with Jamun. Maruda sat opposite them. The Naga soldiers climbed in other chariots that Maruda had brought with him. We aren't Yavan Bialis, my dear, he grinned before he asked the driver to ignite the Amrit and maneuver the chariot. The feast had begun. Tables had been filled with all kinds of delicacies. Some people were eating and some were dancing with Apsaras, but even with the festivities around, Kadru couldn't help but think about Mansa. She was worried that Mansa she had jumped in the lake that merged with the river Sheshnag. This river joined another river in Bhanmati. Hopefully she hasn't reached the bloody kingdom of Vibhishna. She could only hope. There was a lot of distraction. Lord Taraksha, seated in the center, was caressing the cheek of an Apsara sitting on the arm of his chair. The Supans were joyously celebrating the treaty between the Nagas and Supans. Kadru's men were thoroughly enjoying themselves as well. She had brought 15 of her trusted ministers. Taraksha had one condition: no soldiers, only the people in Kadru's inner circle could attend the feast. Kadru noticed how Supans looked quite similar to Manavs. The only difference was that they were strangely obsessed with the color yellow and golden. They would dress themselves in that color, paint the buildings in that color, and even preferred to eat things of that color. The feast was happening in the open. Guards had been placed around the premises. The tall, bronze statue of Garuda towered over the place. All the guards had strange, small wings clasped at their backs and Amrit in their pockets to fly off when needed. Some people laughed as the clown entertained them, while the others were ogling at the dancers. At least the Nagas don't treat women like objects. Jamun was drinking a delicious gold wine. He even nudged Kadru, told her to have some fun, but her mind was on other things. She was observing the little entrances and exits that were in the crevices of Supan Bhumi, the city. Unfortunately, the feast was happening outside the main domain of Lord Taraksha, and it was evident that that was where lay the reserves of Amrit. Kadru saw one of her guards that she had sent to scout the city while everyone enjoyed the celebration. The Naga guard came to her and whispered in Kadru's ears, "There's a trolley that goes down to the caves. Usually many guards are stationed there, but today some of them missed their duty to come and watch the feast." Kadru nodded. She knew what she had to do. She hadn't come here to wine and dine. She glanced at Lord Taraksha. He was 7 feet tall, had coal in his eyes, and his waist-long hair had been oiled. He was busy drinking and dancing. Time to go. The trolley was close to Lord Taraksha's palace in a small citadel that was hidden in the shadows. Kadru was traversing through dark lanes, lit by fire lamps. She, with 2 of her guards, entered the lane and grabbed one of the fire lamps. 2 armed Supan guards were standing next to a grilled door. "Who is this?" one of them called. Kadru wasn't afraid. She pulled her sword out of the sheath, and without wasting any time, she stabbed one of them in the throat and with a quick reflex, beheaded the other one. She had been so fast that the guards hadn't seen it coming. She looked at the grilled door as she began to bash it open, as much as she could, finally breaking the lock and coming inside a small platform that had a rope and a pulley. Her guards pushed the pulley and the trolley moved downwards. As the cement in the corners began to wash off, she saw she was leaving the floating city that was held up by the pillars. The city finally revealed to be hollow from within, made of iron just like the entire facade. The pillars were intertwined with vines and shrubs. She looked down to see the rushing sea as she saw a small shore of sand and marshes that led to the deep, glimmering caves made of charcoal black stone. The trolley finally reached the platform. The smell of seaweed and oysters wafted in the air as she stepped out of the trolley. There were rocks of black and brown texture, humongous in size, that glinted in the light. She walked to the caves and saw what she desired. Somalta plants were spread across the entire cave. The caves were incredibly huge. They seemed to go on forever. Supans can conquer the world with this, and yet they don't, impervious to what they have. Some Tiavan Biailis just didn't have foresight like Kadru did. She wanted to conquer Ilavarti and make it the land ruled by Nagas, and she would be able to achieve it only through the use of Amrit. She plucked out one of the plants and crushed it over her wound. Her guards questionably watched her as she began to rub the paste. soothed her initially but rather burnt her. But it'll be fine after a while. Gather as much as you can in the sack. The guards nodded, pulling out cotton sacks that they had kept inside their breastplate. Kadru also pulled out the sack from under her clothes and kept the fire lamp on the ground. As she began to tear out the plants, dropping them inside, she heard a familiar voice, "What are doing, Snake?" Kadru turned, so did her guards. They dropped their sacks, pointing their swords at the figure, but Kadru signaled them to lower their weapons. Standing in front of her was Maruda with a devious grin over his face. He was alone. "I'm quite shaken by your betrayal, but then I did expect this from a snake. I was quite curious as to why there were two dead guards at the entrance of the trolley. Now it makes sense." Kadru just smiled. "He is an idiot to come alone to face me." "Why are you alone?" she asked. "Because honestly," he pulled out his sword, "I can defeat you all by myself. Imagine my reward when I tell Lord Taraksha about how I stopped you from stealing his treasure." Kadru sighed. There had to be some complication before Maruda could come forward. Kadru lurched forward with her own sword. Maruda instantly deflected it. "You thought you can be spontaneous, NAW Snake. I'm better." And then he clanged his weapon against hers. She deflected it again. "Why do you never use these against armies?" "Because unlike snakes, we respect our tribe and other people." He pushed her towards the back of the cave. The fire lamp broke apart, and the fire spread and reached the oil that was around the Amrit. The cave was on fire. Kadru saw her guards leaving with their sacks out of the cave to be safe, while she and Maruda watched the burning caves going up in ashes. "You fool. You don't bring a fire lamp inside. The plants give out oil from their roots. It's combustible." And with that he bashed his sword against her sword. She dodged, rolling around as she saw the flames burst open, and there was a crackling noise. The crackles grew louder. A strange light emanated, blinding both Kadru and Maruda. The cave had exploded. Kadru was flung outside from the impact. She yelled in pain. Her body was burning, and she jumped in the water to douse the flames. She had no idea where her sword was. 4 hands gripped her and pulled her up. Maruda came out of the cave slowly. His back was burnt. He staggered towards Kadru, trying to attack her with his sword, but by the time he reached her, he was dead. They climbed in the trolley. As Kadru staggered and sighed, she was panting, carrying the heavy sacks of the remaining Somalta plants. As she came out of the palace, she felt tremors in the ground. Kadru told the guards to hide the sacks while she went to fetch Jamun. She had to escape. As she reached the area of the feast, she saw Jamun enjoying the show. He was in the same spot, but Taraksha wasn't there, nor were his guards. Kadru walked up to him, trying to act naturally. As she sat down, Jamun's smile vanished as he turned to Kadru and said, "We have a problem, and I solved that problem. I got the plants, but I kind of destroyed the stock." Jamun widened his eyes in horror. "What should we do now?" He was drunk but was trying to retain his wits as he bit his tongue. "Find a flying chariot and escape the hell out of here." She paused, recalling something Jamun had said earlier. "What was the problem you just referred to?" He shook his head irritably. "She's here," she demanded. "Taraksha's presence immediately." "Who?" Kadru arched her brows. "Mansa." Nala was never the revenge sort of a person. In fact, the only reason he was coming all the way from Alak was because he had started feeling constricted there. The sand dunes, the ugly hot weather. He was sick of that place. He had been on his way to Indragarh with his army, only to learn midway that his father had been killed by a young girl. Nala spat at the idea, but then he knew his father was not an intelligent man. Now Nala was stranded in the middle of nowhere, waiting outside the gates of Indragarh. With his men, he was resting on a cushion, sipping his wine next to his naked Apsara wife Ramba. Her emerald necklace gleamed in the light. "Kill her," the voice said in his head. Nala was not the sanest person since he was a child. He could hear his dead mother's voice in his head. His father had murdered her after she had born the kids. After all, women had no importance in the Yaksh tribe. That's why they often slept with Apsaras who could be easily disposed. But Nala had been exceptionally close to his mother, and losing her made him lose his mind. He didn't do anything about it, didn't take his father's life out of spite. All he wanted was to hear her voice in any form. Nala wasn't the ideal Yaksh. Her Yakshs were bald and ugly, but he was handsome, tall and firm. His ripped body, silky hair, dusky eyes and deep voice made the women turn around to look at him. Everything about him exhibited a sense of royalty, especially when he wore his golden-laced overcoat with a dhoti open in the front, showing his rippling muscles. He had a goatee. Was it the right thing to do, letting Gumukha appoint Ramras as the king? The voice asked. I don't care, he whispered to himself, so Rambha won't hear him. I would kill Ramras too. I just want to go inside and burn the place. That won't be wise, my child. If you have Indragarh, you have the entire north, but I have never thought about ruling Indragarh. You are talking like your dead brother now, my child, the voice chided. Remember, there's no progress in remaining the prince of Yakshs now. With your father dead, you have no one stopping you. You are the heir to Allah, and you can be the heir to Indragarh. The thought rolled around in his mind. His father always told him to never be too ambitious, but his mother wanted him to chase his dreams. It was the only way to survive. It was not so bad. First give them what they want and then infiltrate and rob them. The voice of his mother spoke to him softly, and you can only do it if you dream bigger. I don't have a big army. Manavs still outnumber us. You can buy the mercenaries. Money is something we are never short of. Nala thought for a moment. His wife grazed the back of his coat. My dear, who are you mumbling to? She asked. Nala ignored her. Kill her, his mother said. She has stayed too long and cannot even bear you. An heir. Kill her. Nala shook his head. He was wild and impulsive, but he didn't want to kill the only person who cared for him. Ramba, she was always there for him. She let him bed other girls but didn't sleep with other men. That was what Nala loved about her. She let him own her without making him feel restricted. Nala turned to see Ramba. She is perfect, intoxicated by her green eyes and her broad smile. He leaned forward and kissed her on the neck. She giggled. He then kissed her on the cheeks and then on her lips. Yaram, my lord. Nala grunted. He hated being disturbed. When he was in bed, standing close to the tent flaps was a young Yaksh soldier. My lord, Lady Urvashi has sent her messenger. She demands your presence. Nala smiled, looking at Ramba, who patted him proudly. Nala walked to the guard and asked, what did Gumukha say? I haven't received any news from him. Ramras lost. That was not a problem. Gumukha's plan had been flimsy. He nodded to himself as the voice in his head spoke again. Do not be hasty. Do not kill the girl. Perhaps she could be used for later. Nala nodded to himself. The Yaksh guard looked at him confused. Nala said to him, tell the messenger that we can have a meeting here in the center of the camp. I shall not go inside because I don't trust that girl. Aren't we going to war, my lord? Wasn't that the original plan? Nala had an amused look on his face. Plans change, my friend. Plans change all the time. Just tell the messenger, all right? The guard nodded and left. Nala turned to see his lavish, luxurious tent with candles and fire lamps, grapes and wine. In the center was a bed on which were plush cushions and smooth cotton blankets. Ramba casually opened her hair as she asked, what do you plan to do? Nala thought for a moment. Kill her, said the voice again. She has no reason to stay alive anymore. Nala sighed. I don't know, he responded, ignoring his mother's voice. I just don't know, but if for some reason I'm excited to see what happens next. Things are finally getting interesting. An open tent had been set up for Urvashi's welcome. Some food and drinks had been placed inside it, but Nala made sure that his guards had been armed, ready to strike if the need arose. Unfortunately, Yakshs weren't the strongest and the fittest when it came to battle like the Rakshas, but they could take someone in a fight. They were quite sharp. Lady Urvashi arrived. Nala stood up from his chair. Urvashi had an oval-shaped face. Her braids stirred and her long robe rustled as she walked. To bannermen stood at her sides and 15 guards marched behind her. The roads were dusty and sandy. Some trees and bushes had grown at the sides. Nalkuvera had most of the trees around the tent removed. Nala also noticed that just like he had brought Ramba, she had brought two men, one short with wavy hair with a scar on his face and one black-haired hunk who looked like a wrestler. Nala's heart raced in excitement at the sight of these handsome men. He liked men as well as women. Urvashi didn't take a seat. She was being formal. Let's cut to the chase. I harmed your father, so I'm here to make a proposition. Harmed? His eyes brightened. You killed my father? Urvashi remained impassive. Mind to sit down with me? Nala asked. She shook her head. I'm here to make a proposition. If you won't listen, I shall return. I don't plan on dining with blackmailers. I'm not a blackmailer, he softly added. I'm just a boy who wants to have his father's corpse so I could give him a proper Yaksh burial that could be arranged. And Gumukha said you were unreasonable, he exclaimed with a laugh. Why did you kill my father? I mean, he's not the most pleasant man I know, but why? She looked in his eyes and said, he killed my father. Karma. He nodded. you sure you don't want anything to eat? She shook her head. Ramras told me you plan to attack my city if I become the queen. Nala was keenly observing Urvashi. Her eyes are so expressive. There is wisdom beyond her years in those irises. Would you do that? It depends on how reasonable you are. I mean, I thought my involvement would make Ramras the king, but I'm surprised they chose you. You must have offered something really enticing for them to be interested. Yes, I convinced them. She paused as the scarred boy leaned down and whispered something in her ear. She nodded and then said, I come in peace. If you accept my friendship, you and your army can situate yourself in the quarters and fort that once belonged to Lord Kuvera, and you can give him a proper burial there. I wish you no harm, and I hope we can let bygones be bygones. She's good. It's convenient for you, isn't it, that she has killed your father, although I guess he deserved it. The voice said she can be useful. She holds the north. Marry her. Nala didn't hate the idea. It did make sense, but then he had Rambha, who he was lawfully wedded to. The only other problem was Urvashi was quite young for Nala, though there was no age barrier in marriage for Yakshs. Nala stood up and walked towards Urvashi. Urvashi did the same as Nala extended his hand. I accept your partnership. Let's hope this benefits both of us. Urvashi had a sly smile on her face. It would, and she shook his hand. Urvashi began to leave. Nala watched her party retreat. He stood watching them for a few moments, and then Rambha came and stood beside him. She was wearing nothing but a transparent robe, her bushy hair cascading down her back. She whispered in Nala's ears, you are really letting your father's killer leave unscathed? Nala knew what she meant. Where they lived, the Yakshs pretty much considered Kuvera a god. They used to touch his feet, wipe his hands, kiss him palms. For them, all the other gods meant nothing, and when you kill a god, there's no knowing what his followers would do. Nala turned to face the Yakshs who were standing behind him in a line. They looked disappointed, and then Nala realized something. Since his father and elder brother were dead, he was their god now. For now, Nala said, and kissed his wife passionately as he thought about a plan that might just work in his favor. But I'm seeing. The plans were being discussed in the biggest hut in Dharmayoddha. Kalki stood in the corner cross-armed. He was listening to the conversation between the quarreling Vanars. At times they would begin to squeal and croak, arguing with Lord Bajrang. Even though he was revered like a god all across Ilavarti, his people didn't hesitate to voice their apprehension. Lord Bajrang often glanced at Kalki, worried. Shuko was sitting on Kalki's shoulder. He was getting bored. Ratna and Smrit had joined the planning council, but neither was speaking much. Kalki knew they were much more interested in freeing the Apsaras that Kalki had seen in Tar's camp. Plan for them. Shuko said, I'm not Arjun. Arjun was a planner. I am more of an executioner. Well, Arjun is not here, so I would like you to plan. Kalki sighed. Where did you go for so long? You kept vanishing in between. If you plan, I will tell. That's all right. Kalki smiled to himself. Shuko would often disappear for days, only to be seen later on. This parrot comes and goes as he pleases. Kalki came forward and stood near the table. A map had been spread on it. There were scribbles all over it. He could see the location where Tar was stationed along with his men. He was in the hills near a valley, and in front of the hills was the frozen lake where the battle might happen. It was not an ideal battleground. The ice was thin. One misstep and they would plunge to their deaths. One needs to cross this frozen lake to reach us Bajrang's side, and from the back there's a steep way, but it should be well guarded. There's another path that Tar might take to come here. He showed the flimsy design of the bridge that reached Bajrang's camp. What I suggest is block all paths and stand in defense. The moment they arrive, we go in. But my lord, one of the Vanars said, you can stop them single-handedly. Please stop them. Lord Bajrang looked up. There was pain in his eyes. You know, I promised Lord Raghav that I shall not involve myself in battles after the one we had with Dushasan, and I mean to keep that promise. Kalki didn't know about this. Lord Bajrang was revered for keeping his word, and it was true. Lord Bajrang was so strong that he could beat an army, but he won't because he was a man of his word. But what if we lose? Then we lose, sighed Bajrang. But I shall not fight. That's why we are planning our defense. I'll be always there to help you, methodically, but not physically. I cannot do that. That's a bad plan. Shuko said, shut up. You are a just parrot. Don't act like you know everything about battle plans. Kalki raised his hand as if he was in go. Rupal. Bajrang looked at him and smiled. What is it? If we are not attacking, that means my friends are going to die. Bajrang looked puzzled. Kalki realized Bajrang had not anticipated this. He had not thought about Kalki's friends at all, but Kalki had. What about the Apsaras? Asked Ratna, gritting her teeth. I explicitly told you I'm here with my friend just so that I can liberate them. I am not interested in joining your pointless Vanar politics. Bajrang didn't take offense At that he listened to Ratna with patience. All right, I have another plan. He cheekily grinned, trying to diminish the tension with his lovable nature. You and you, he pointed at Kalki and Ratna. Go from here, he said, pointing towards the back of Tar's camp which snaked through the valley. Sneak and find your friends and comrades, get them out and leave. You don't have to join our cause, but I cannot give you any of my men because they'll be blocking these two entrances. He pointed at the frozen river which was near the frontier, and the bridge seems fair. Ratna nodded and left the hut with. Kalki was confused. Did Ratna just agree to having no backup? Did she really think she could defeat so many bloodthirsty Vanars? He had seen them. They had looked dangerous. He had seen their sturdy armor and sharp axes. It was not wise to attack them mindlessly. Plus Vanars' hearing was sharp. The slightest of sound and they will be caught. They cannot be taken by surprise. Is it fine with you? Bajrang asked, concerned. Kalki reluctantly nodded. Good, he smiled. I'll show you what you'll be riding now. He muttered something to his Vanar general to execute the plan into motion, informing him of the men who were to be stationed at various locations in the camp and of the men who were to remain inside for backup. Kalki followed Bajrang out of the hut and into the thick crust of snow that lay on the field. As he walked, Kalki tried to catch up to Bajrang. I didn't know you had renounced violence. I had to. It was the only way to stop it. Stop what? Stop violence. They were coming close to a wide range of Efret tents where horses had been lined up in a stable tied to wooden barks. Just because you have stopped violence doesn't mean the world will, Kalki said grimly. The idea seemed foolish and kind of suicidal. Bajrang's and men were about to slaughter each other. It'll not make a difference and there will still be evil at bay. At least if you fight you have a chance of winning, Bajrang responded. There might be, but then when will it stop? The problem is we think one man can't make a difference. If your morality is in the right place and you have a strong will, then all you need is one man to make a difference. You ask how? Because he ends up inspiring the world to follow these morals. He winked. You are preaching to be peaceful, but the world is ending. That's idealistic. You should be practical. I'm an idealist through and through. Kalki laughed as he reached the stable, but then he saw the Vanars sitting on the horses. They were taking them away. You need a ride, Bajrang said. There were only mules and donkeys left in the stable now, but my men have already taken the best stallions for themselves. Monkeys on horses? Kalki chuckled. Bajrang smiled back at Kalki. He was not offended, and Kalki had immediately regretted saying Vanars are actually not monkeys. They are just worshippers of monkeys. You do realize that, don't you? Means man, that means we are men of the jungle, but since we have to migrate in the winters, I don't know what we are. He shrugged, his muscles flexing in the process. Kripa drinks so much because he is tired of being an immortal. How are you so content with your life? They reached the end of the stable where Kalki saw a white stallion. I think it's about the attitude towards the problem. Kalki nodded. Bajrang was philosophizing again, but he had a point. Would Bhargav Ram mentor me like Lord Bajrang? Bhargav Ram was the sixth avatar of Lord Vishnu. He must know so much. Who's this? Kalki asked about the white horse. The horse grunted at Kalki. This is someone who no one rides because no one can ride him, Bajrang said, and patted the horse. The horse looked regal. His fur was white, but had a golden tinge to it. The hair on his mane were dense and silky. They flowed freely in the breeze. I tried as well. We found him in the forest drinking from the stream nearby, but we couldn't domesticate him, and no one could. Bajrang shook his head. Do you know how to ride horses? Oh, I wish. Kalki came inside the den where the white horse stood. He patted him on the head and brushed his skin with a quick jerk. The horse used its back limbs to kick him. Kalki landed at the other end of the stable as Shuko leapt from Kalki's shoulder to save himself. Bajrang helped him up. He's feisty, Kalki panted. I told you, Bajrang said. I think I can give you my horse. No, Kalki shook his head as Shuko perched on his shoulder again. I shall ride him. I think we can come to an understanding. The horse grunted in response. Or not, Bajrang laughed. You are a funny man, Kalki. Then he turned serious. Listen, you must leave as soon as you get your friends. You don't need my help. Come on, Bajrang smiled. You don't want to help me. You are healed and you are done here. I thought I would change your mind, but you are destined to do better things than solving and fighting Vanar wars. Wars will be waged and people will move on. You must move on. Your destiny awaits you. I will stay here and help my people. They are my family. What if you lose? He lowered his gaze. See, I cannot be killed, but if it comes to the worst scenario, I'll make a deal with him. You will sacrifice yourself for your people? He shrugged. It's all right. I don't mind doing it as long as my people are safe. Ta needs me. Why? Remember the Eye of Brahma? He thinks I have one of the shards. What he doesn't know is that I have it inside me. I won't tell him, but I will use it as leverage to work out a deal with him. I'll say I'll let him use the shard of the Eye of Brahma in in return for the safety of my people he could become invincible and the power might end up corrupting him. Bajrang nodded. And it will corrupt him, I know, but that's a problem for another day. Kalki couldn't understand why Lord Bajrang couldn't just end the war by picking up his Gadha and using it to massacre Tar's army. You don't get it, do you? Bajrang understood his confusion as he studied Kalki's face. You don't get why I don't fight? Kalki nodded. When Lord Raghav won the war against Dushasan, he and my brother Sugriva were supposed to leave for Mount Meru in Swat, the original homeland of Lord Raghav in the far north out of Ilavarti. I was supposed to follow them. I had been their friend and a supporter of their cause, but I didn't. You know why? Kalki shook his head. Because I'm a Dakshini. Sugriva was too, but he didn't care about that. I was a Dakshini, a southerner whose life was in Ilavarti, in this homeland, to protect and guard my tribe, and I've lived with Vanars for so long. I've seen the old perish and the young grow up. I remember Tar used to be a rebel even during his Gurukul days. I had been like an uncle to him. Even then he had been ambitious. He hadn't cared about the plans I had for Kishkinda. He always talked about how we ought to conquer the world. Bajrang sighed, thinking of the problems he had to deal with for decades, and I don't blame him for that. He wanted to conquer it because he knew what we were capable of. He knew we were advanced in comparison to other Tiavanbilis. We are wiser, more agile. But he forgot one thing. I've lived for hundreds of years. I know a lot of things and I've seen a lot of things, and it doesn't matter how much you can conquer. I believe if you can conquer someone's heart, then that's enough. We live long enough to fight, but not long enough to love, and I knew there's no satisfaction in colonizing the tribes as much as it is important to develop your own tribe, to nurture them and help them. Kalki was mulling it over when Bajrang put his heavy arm around Kalki's shoulder. What are you? You don't have to be. My war is over. Yours has started, and perhaps you will have to fight. But remember one thing, just because you are non-violent doesn't mean you are weak. Kalki nodded. That's why you didn't do anything during the Mahayuddha during the time of Lord Govind? Of course, Govind was a dear friend, but he understood our wars were different, our times were different. He had to resort to violence by associating with people like Arjuna, Yudhishthira, and the others. I didn't, and that's all right, though I did manage to enthrall Bhima when he tried to pick me up. He laughed. Kalki smiled back as Bajrang left him, whispering good luck for his mission. He looked at the horse again. Even in the dark, he was gleaming with pure white, angelic beauty. Kalki sat beside the horse. You know, you are like a person I knew. Stubborn this time. When Kalki patted him, the horse didn't jerk him away. He kicked the den doors open and let the horse knock the hooves up. As they brushed the snow coming out of the stable, Shuko fluttered his wings and sat on Kalki's shoulder. Isn't Bajrang too much of a melodrama? Shut up, genius. Where is your weapon? Kalki shook his head in confusion. He had prepared himself, but had forgotten to take a weapon. I'll get it. Shugo flew away towards the armory while Kalki balanced himself on the horse. He didn't make the horse wear any saddle since it might end up irritating the beast. Shugo returned, clutching a short sword in his talons, and dropped it in Kalki's hand. How did you manage to hold such a heavy sword? Because I'm special like you. Oh please, also where were you till now? Shuko squawked. I went to see Arjun back in Indragarh. What? Yeah, I thought of checking up on him to make sure he's alive or not. And is he? Very much so. Kalki beamed. He was ecstatic. Thank God, I will go see him as soon as possible. I missed him terribly. You were being unnecessarily harsh on that assassin girl. Padma. Kalki nodded. You're right. Though he had sorted out his differences with her, there was still enmity between them before she was kidnapped. Kalki had angrily proclaimed that he would venture into Mahendragiri without her. And what will you do with Kripa? I have no idea. He saw Ratna and Smrit mounting their horses moving towards the path which led to the valley. Ratna turned and signaled Kalki to follow her. Kalki patted the horse and then rode forward. Let's see what Tar's men are capable of.